Lord, give me strength. The number on the screen didn't just sit there. It pulsed, a venomous digital heartbeat in stark black and white on the Wells Fargo portal. $87,000. Not in my account, mind you, gone from it. A fat, ugly minus sign stood in front of it like a sentry guarding the gates of my own personal hell. My hand, the one holding the bone china teacup Frank bought me for our 30th anniversary, began to tremble. Just a little at first, a slight tremor my arthritis sometimes blesses me with, but then it grew into a proper quake, sloshing hot Earl Grey over my fingers. I barely felt the burn. The familiar, comforting scent of bergamot and the lavender potpourri simmering on the sideboard, the sense of my home, my sanctuary for 42 years, did absolutely nothing to calm the ice water flooding my veins. This house, this quiet street in Atlanta, was supposed to be safe. Everything within these walls was supposed to be under my control. I set the cup down with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the morning silence. My eyes were glued to the laptop, an expensive MacBook Air that my son insisted I buy. "It's more secure, Mom," he'd said. Secure. That was a laugh. As if on cue, a little notification popped up in the corner of the screen, cheerful and utterly obscene. A green shield icon with a perfect white checkmark. It read, "Wi-Fi security health is 100%. Oh, for the love of... I just scoffed, a bitter, ugly sound. 100% secure. Bullshit. That was courtesy of Leo, the insufferable tech whippersnapper who moved in next door last month. A nice enough boy, I suppose, if you like being patronized by someone who still has acne. He took one look at my old router and acted like he'd discovered a relic from the Stone Age. He insisted on installing this new, complicated mesh system, chattering on and on about things that made my head spin. "Miss Parker, this is top of the line," he'd said, his voice earnest and squeaking with youthful certainty. "It logs everything, every IP address, all the metadata. If anyone even thinks about trying something funny, we'll have a complete digital footprint." Metadata. IP logs. It sounded like gibberish to me. Back in my day, security meant a good deadbolt and a German Shepherd. Now, it's a blinking box that promises you the world and a smug 20-year-old who uses words I'm pretty sure he makes up on the spot. And what good was it doing me now? My Wi-Fi might be healthy, but my life savings were flatlining. My accountant brain, the part of me that spent 35 years balancing ledgers down to the last penny, tried to wrestle control from the panic. "Calm down, Helen. Think." My first thought was, it's a mistake, a glitch in the system. Some poor soul at the bank probably hopped up on coffee, typed an extra zero, or put a decibel in the wrong place. It happens. It's messy, but it's fixable. I've fixed bigger messes than that for clients who couldn't balance a checkbook to save their lives. I clicked refresh. The page blinked. The number was still there, mocking me. Negative $87,000. I scrolled down, my fingers shaking on the trackpad. Transaction history. Maybe it would show a transfer, a purchase, something I could dispute. But there was nothing, just the balance. A gaping, bleeding wound where my security used to be. The money Frank and I scrimped and saved for. The money that paid my property taxes, that covered the new roof last year. The money that let me sleep at night knowing that if the water heater exploded, I wouldn't have to choose between hot showers and eating. My Social Security check barely covers the groceries these days, you know what I mean? This money, this was my independence. It was the barrier between me and being a burden to my children. A new feeling started to push past the cold fear. Rage, a hot, furious wave of it. The absolute audacity of it. The violation. This wasn't just numbers on a screen. This was my life. Frank's life. He worked his fingers to the bone for that money. He would be spinning in his grave. "Oh, that's just perfect, sweetie," I muttered to the glowing screen, my voice dripping with a sarcasm so sharp it could cut glass. 100% secure. I leaned back in my chair, the floral chins of the cushion suddenly feeling flimsy and warm. I stared at the screen, at that hateful number, and my mind started racing past the simple explanations. A glitch felt too easy, a bank error felt too neat. A cold dread, far deeper and more terrifying than a simple mistake, began to settle in the pit of my stomach. This felt calculated. It felt intentional. It felt personal. Is this a bank error, or is this something far more sinister?
Bullshit. Absolute, unadulterated bullshit. A bank error is a line item that says correction or duplicate charge. A glitch is when the website is down for an hour. This was a void, an erasure. And I knew, with the certainty that comes from 35 years of staring at ledgers and balancing accounts down to the last penny, that money like that doesn't just vanish. It gets moved. I pushed myself up from the desk, my arthritis screaming in my hip, and walked out to the back porch. The old oak swing, Frank's pride and joy, creaked a steady, comforting rhythm as I sat down. The evening air was thick with the scent of my prize-winning gardenias and the faint smell of my neighbor, Bob, grilling something that was probably going to give him heartburn. Normally, this was my sanctuary. A tall glass of iced Earl Grey, the birds chirping their last songs of the day. It was the picture of a peaceful retirement. But tonight, the peace felt like a lie, a thin veneer over a pit of vipers. My hand trembled as I picked up my iPhone, a gift from my son who insisted I needed to be able to FaceTime with the grandkids. I scrolled through my contacts, past my daughter Sarah, past my bridge club ladies, past the plumber. And there it was, Marcus Thorne, financial advisor. It looked so innocent, so professional. I took a deep, shuddering breath, tasting the jasmine on the air, and pressed the call button. He picked up on the second ring. Of course he did, always so attentive. Helen, my favorite client. To what do I owe the pleasure on this fine evening? His voice oozed through the phone's speaker, smooth and rich like warm caramel. The kind of voice that could sell a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves, as my mother used to say. I kept my own voice steady. Marcus, it's Helen Parker. I seem to have a problem with my account. A rather significant problem. A problem? Oh, I'm sure it's nothing, Helen. What seems to be the trouble? The practiced calm in his voice was already starting to grate on my last nerve. The trouble, Marcus, is that $87,000 of my money is gone, vanished. The account is practically empty. There was a pause. Not a worried pause, a calculated one. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, clicking through his Rolodex of excuses. Then came the soft, patronizing chuckle. Ah, I see what's happened. Helen, I had you worried there for a second. No, your money isn't gone. Of course not. We just moved your portfolio into that new high-yield instrument we discussed, the Patriot Secure Arbitrage Fund. Remember? It's just a standard 3-day SEC clearing period while the funds are transferred and verified. It's for your protection. The balance will reappear, bigger and better, by Friday at the latest. 100% secure. I felt my blood run cold. Not with fear anymore. With a clarity so sharp and bright, it hurt. I spent my entire career in accounting. I know what a transfer looks like. There's a paper trail, there are pending transactions, there is always a record. You don't just create a black hole for 3 days. The Patriot Secure Arbitrage Fund? It sounded like he made up on the spot, combining words that sound safe and profitable to people on a fixed income. And then he said it, the words that sealed his fate. Now, don't you worry your pretty little head about a thing, Helen. I've got it all under control. And that was it. That was the moment the rage solidified into a diamond-hard purpose. Pretty little head? Honey, this pretty little head balanced the books for a multi-million-dollar logistics firm for 35 years. This pretty little head could spot a padded expense report from 50 paces. This pretty little head raised 2 children, managed a household, and buried a husband with a grace that this little whippersnapper couldn't possibly comprehend. He thought I was just another dotty old woman who didn't understand how the internet worked. He thought he could baffle me with bullshit and pat me on the head. In that instant, a decision was made. The real Helen Parker, the sharp, furious retired accountant, went silent. In her place, a new Helen emerged, the one he expected, the one he deserved. My voice, when I finally used it, was a masterpiece, if I do say so myself. I pitched it a little higher, added a slight, frail tremor. "Oh," I breathed into the phone, a perfect imitation of relieved confusion. "Oh, a fund. Goodness, Marcus. Thank you for explaining. It's all so complicated these days. My old brain just doesn't keep up like it used to. 3 days, you say?" "That's right, Helen. By Friday, you'll be earning a return you couldn't have dreamed of." His voice was practically purring now. He was eating it up. "Well, that's just wonderful," I said, my voice wavering. "You know, would it be too much trouble to ask you to mail me some of the paperwork on that Patriot Fund? I like to have a hard copy for my files. It makes me feel safer." "Not a problem at all, Helen. I'll get it in the mail for you tomorrow." "You're a dear boy, Marcus. Thank you for setting my mind at ease." We hung up, and I sat there, on the swing, the phone clutched in my hand. The evening chorus of crickets started up. The game was on. This snake oil salesman thought he'd hooked a guppy, a confused old woman who he could reel in and gut. He had no idea he'd just picked a fight with a shark. But playing the fool, that takes a certain kind of strength, a discipline I wasn't sure I had. Can she maintain the facade long enough to trap him? Bullshit. That was the first, last, and only word that echoed in my head as I drove my 10-year-old Buick to the First Atlanta Bank branch the next morning. Not the downtown one, with its soaring ceilings and delusions of grandeur, but the squat, brick satellite branch off Peachtree. The one next smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and old money. The kind of place where the tellers have seen it all and aren't impressed by any of it. I didn't play the frail old lady card this time. Screw that. This was my turf. Accounting, numbers, ledgers, that was my world for 45 years. I walked in there with my back straight, my arthritis be damned, and a polite but firm request to see the branch manager. A young man named Mr. Davies, who looked like he was still renting his first tuxedo, ushered me into a glass-walled office. He had that smooth, placating smile that financial people get when they smell a problem they want to disappear. He offered me coffee. I asked for Earl Grey. He brought me Lipton in a paper cup. "Strike one, sweetie." "Mrs. Parker," he began, folding his hands on his pristine desk, "I've reviewed the transaction you flagged. I understand your concern, but I want to assure you our systems are quite secure." "Mr. Davies," I said, my voice as level as a balance sheet, $87,000 has been transferred from my retirement account without my authorization. I don't care if your system was built by the Almighty himself. There has been a mistake." He gave me a patient little nod, the kind you give a child who insists there is a monster under the bed. "Let me show you." He swiveled a large, glossy monitor toward me. On the screen was a digital authorization form, and there, at the bottom, was my signature. My blood ran cold. It wasn't like my signature, it was my signature. The elegant looping H, the sharp P of Parker, the way the N in Helen has a slightly higher arch. It was perfect. A perfect, sterile digital ghost of my own hand. "As you can see," Mr. Davies said, his voice dripping with condescending reassurance, The transfer was authorized with your unique e-signature on Tuesday at 2:14 p.m. Not only that, but it was verified through our new two-factor system. You remember that security update we had everyone install back in March? The BioSign app for your iPhone? You would have had to approve the transaction with your fingerprint on your phone to let it go through. It's state-of-the-art, foolproof, really. I stared at the screen. BioSign. I did remember that damn app, a nuisance. It took me 20 minutes to set it up, pressing my thumb to the screen over and over until it was satisfied. Another layer of so-called security that just made it harder to check my own balance. I never used it. I never approved anything. I was on my porch swing at 2:14 p.m. on Tuesday. I was watching a blue jay harass a squirrel. I did not touch my phone, and I certainly did not authorize a withdrawal that guts my entire life savings. He sighed, the mask of patience slipping just a fraction. Mrs. Parker, Helen, I understand this is upsetting, but the digital footprint is clear. The signature is a perfect match, and the biometric verification is, well, it's your fingerprint. From our end, this is a legitimate, verified transaction. Once the funds are wired, it's irreversible. It's out of our hands. Out of his hands. Honey, he had no idea in whose hands it was in now. The retired accountant was gone. The polite widow was gone. The confused old woman on the phone was a distant memory. I looked him dead in the eye. Print it, I said. I'm sorry? Print. The authorization form. I want a hard copy. He blinked, taken aback by the shift in tone. For the first time, the plastic smile was gone. He fumbled with his mouse, and a printer somewhere behind him whirred to life. He handed me the sheet of paper, still warm. It felt like a death certificate for my financial security. I folded it precisely in half and slipped it into my handbag. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Thank you for your time, Mr. Davies, I said. The words were civil, but the tone was pure ice. You've been most illustrative. I walked out of that bank, the automatic doors hissing shut behind me. The Georgia sun felt impossibly bright. I held the fraudulent document in my purse, a piece of paper that said I was a liar or a fool. It was my word against a so-called secure system. My truth against a perfect digital lie. The problem wasn't proving that a crime had been committed. The question that burned in my mind, the one that would keep me up for nights to come, was this: how in the hell do you prove a perfect forgery is fake?
Lord, the silence in my house was deafening. I walked in and it was like all the air had been sucked out. My little bungalow in Chastain Park, the one Frank and I bought back when interest rates were sane, had always been my sanctuary. Now it felt like a crime scene. I laid that cursed piece of paper from the bank on my dining room table, the table Frank had built with his own 2 hands. The authorization form sat there, stark white against the dark mahogany, a monument to my own stupidity, or so they wanted me to believe. $87,000. It wasn't just money. It was my furnace replacement fund. It was the emergency cushion for my property taxes. It was the fly to see the grandkids without worrying about the cost money. It was the dignity of not having to ask my children for a damn thing. It was my independence, printed in neat, sterile lines of Helvetica font. I made myself a cup of Earl Grey, the bergamot scent usually so calming, but my hands were shaking so much the china cup rattled in its saucer. I sat there for a good hour, just staring at that paper. The fight-or-flight instinct is a funny thing. For a moment, all I wanted to do was fly into a hole and pull it in after me. Let the grief and the shame swallow me whole. Then I got mad. Screw that! Frank Parker didn't raise a quitter, and neither did my father. The accountant in me, the one I'd put to bed a decade ago, woke up with a vengeance. My first stop wasn't the police. Honey, what were they gonna do? Look at the same piece of paper Mr. Davies at the bank did and give me a pamphlet on elder fraud? No! My first stop was my own study. I pulled out my old friends, the CPA exam review manuals from 1988, dusty tomes on forensic accounting, textbooks with titles like Auditing and Assurance Services. The paper was yellowed, the bindings cracked, but the principles are timeless. Follow the money, find the motive, document everything. But this wasn't 1988. There was no paper trail, no doctored checkbook, no cooked books in a dusty ledger. This was a crime made of light and electricity. So I sat down at my old Dell computer, the arthritis in my knuckles protesting with every click of the mouse, and I went to war with Google. I typed in things I hadn't thought about in years and things I'd never heard of. Insufficient evidence of digital signature forgery, IP address tracing for civilians, biometric data security flaws, iPhone. Page after page, I went down the rabbit hole. I printed out articles until my little printer was hot to the touch. The dining room table disappeared under stacks of paper covered in my spidery highlighter marks. I learned about device IDs, MAC addresses, and timestamps logged on servers in states I've never even visited. And with every article I read, the pit in my stomach grew colder. They were right. From a technical standpoint, the forgery was perfect. The system was designed to be irrefutable. It was a digital wall, and they had handed me a plastic spoon to dig my way through it. I could spend the rest of my fixed income on tech experts and lawyers, and all they'd do is tell me what I already knew. My word against a machine. I leaned back in my chair, the springs groaning in protest, and closed my eyes. I was exhausted, not just tired, but soul weary. And in that quiet moment, I stopped thinking about the how. How did he do it? It didn't matter. I started thinking about the who. Mr. Alex Sterling. So polished, so charming, the kind of young buck who calls you ma'am while he's picking your pocket. I replayed every meeting, every phone call, the way he'd listen, nodding with that practiced, earnest look on his face. He'd asked about Frank. He'd complimented my garden. He built a relationship, a foundation of trust on which to build his grand betrayal. And that's when I remembered it. A little detail, something he'd dropped into conversation so casually I'd barely registered it. We were talking about long-term care insurance, and he got this sad, faraway look in his eyes. "It's so important, Helen," he'd said, his voice soft. "My own mother, she has a very rare neurological condition. The experimental treatments are, while they're astronomical. I'd do anything to give her a few more good years, you know." At the time, I'd felt a pang of sympathy. What a good son, I'd thought, a man who loves his mother. Now, sitting in my silent house, surrounded by the debris of my digital education, that little story glittered in the dark like a shard of glass. Was it a story to make me trust him? Or was it the truth, providing him with the one thing every good accountant looks for? Motive. Desperation. That was it. That was the crack in the wall. I couldn't prove the fingerprint was a fake. I couldn't prove the IP address was masked, but I didn't have to. This wasn't going to be a battle of technology. This was going to be a battle of psychology. He saw me as a fragile old widow, a lonely, technically illiterate senior citizen who was an easy mark. He thought my age was my weakness. Fine, let's play. I sat up straight. The confusion was gone. The grief was gone. All that was left was a cold, hard clarity I hadn't felt in years. He thought he was a predator who had successfully taken down his prey. He had no idea he'd just poked a sleeping bear with a very, very sharp stick. He wanted me to be a confused, hysterical old woman? Oh, sweetie, I was about to give him the performance of his life. He built a trap for my money, but I was about to build one for his soul. And the bait for my trap was going to be the one thing he thought he'd already stolen: my vulnerability.
Hell, the hardest part was making my voice tremble. I practiced in the bathroom mirror for a good 20 minutes the next morning. It's one thing to feel old, but it's another thing entirely to perform it. I held my iPhone, my thumb hovering over his number. I took a deep breath, pictured my late husband Arthur trying to figure out the self-checkout at Kroger, and channeled his magnificent, world-weary frustration. I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice smooth as butter. "Helen, good morning. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Marcus, sweetie," I began, letting a little quaver into my voice. I made it sound like I'd just run up a flight of stairs. "I am so sorry to bother you. I know you're a busy man." "Never too busy for you, Helen. What's on your mind?" The condescension was already there, that gentle, placating tone you use on a child or a cocker spaniel. Perfect. It's this paperwork you sent over," I said, rustling a stack of my old tax returns from 2008 for effect. "My goodness, I've been staring at it all morning, and my eyes are just swimming. All these numbers, this portfolio diversification. Back in my day, you just put your money in a CD and that was that." I let out a shaky little laugh. I feel so foolish. I'm just so muddled these days. A beat of silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, the predator sensing a final easy meal. "Don't you worry about a thing, Helen," he purred. "That's what I'm here for. I can walk you through it over the phone." "Oh, would you?" I gushed, then pulled back. No, I couldn't impose. And besides, I'm better when I can see things. And there's this one form. It's so peculiar. A phantom factor compliance notice? It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. I let my voice trail off into confused silence. The phantom. Oh, right. That's just a standard SEC filing, Helen. Very boring stuff, I assure you. He was getting impatient. Good. Well, it's just, if you had a spare moment this afternoon, I could make us a pot of tea. My Earl Grey just came in. It would put my mind at ease so much just to have you point to the right lines. I added the final touch. I'm afraid I haven't been sleeping well. Bingo. He will... Of course, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I'll clear my schedule. Say 3 o'clock. We'll get it all sorted out. You're a savior, Marcus. Truly. I hung up and my hand was rock steady. The quaver in my voice vanished. A cold smile touched my lips. Showtime, I whispered to the empty house. By 2:45, my porch was a stage. I'd set out my good Wedgwood china on the wicker table between the 2 rocking chairs. The scent of the lemon polish I'd used on the table mingled with the heavy, sweet perfume of the gardenias blooming along the railing. It was a perfect southern scene, serene, civilized, respectable, a place where nothing bad could possibly happen. I went to my jewelry box and took out the brooch. It was an antique silver piece Arthur had given me for our 25th anniversary, a delicate spray of forget-me-nots. It was also hollow. Arthur had a cousin in the private investigation business, and this little trinket was a relic from a messy divorce case back in the 90s. I'd spent the morning at a specialty electronics store, the kind run by a kid with too many piercings who didn't ask questions. For $60, he'd fitted it with a tiny, high-fidelity Olympus digital recorder. It could record for 8 hours straight. I pinned the brooch to the high collar of my white blouse right over my carotid artery, a perfect vantage point. I pressed the nearly invisible button on the back. A tiny pinprick of a blue light blinked once and then went dark. It was active. At precisely 3 o'clock, his shiny black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. He got out looking like a page from a men's fashion magazine in his tailored blue suit, no tie. He was holding a leather portfolio. He probably thought it made him look important. To me, he just looked like a damn fool walking into a cage. "Helen," he said, flashing a brilliant white smile as he came up the steps. "Your gardenias smell wonderful." "Marcus, thank you again for coming," I said, my voice soft and frail. I gestured to the chair. "Please, sit. The tea is steeping." I moved slowly, deliberately, as if my arthritis was flaring up. I poured the steaming, fragrant Earl Grey into the delicate cups, my hand shaking just enough to make the porcelain rattle against the saucer. He watched me, a faint, smug pity in his eyes. He saw exactly what I wanted him to see: a doddering old woman, a relic, a mark who was about to thank him for robbing her. "Now," he said, leaning forward, all business, "let's take a look at this paperwork that's giving you such trouble." I handed him the folder of old tax returns. "It's all just a jumble to me now, sweetie." As I leaned back in my rocker, I casually lifted my hand to my throat and adjusted the silver brooch, angling the tiny flowers directly at his face. "I just need you to explain it to me one more time, slowly." He opened the folder, a confident smirk playing on his lips, ready to feed me whatever lies I was hungry for. He saw my age, he saw my quiet house, he saw my vulnerability laid out for him on a silver platter next to the sugar ball. He thought he was in control. He thought the game was over. He had no idea it had just begun. Will he take the bait? Lord, the arrogance of that young man. It was a physical thing, like a cheap cologne you could smell from across the room. He didn't even really look at the tax documents I'd given him. He just used the folder as a prop, tapping a manicured finger on the edge of it while he gave me his most compassionate, practiced smile. I felt my knuckles go white around the arm of my rocker. "Control, Helen. Just control." "Oh, Helen," he sighed, and the sound was so thick with false pity it nearly made me gag on my Earl Grey. "We went over all of this last month, remember? At the coffee shop?" I let my eyes go a little unfocused, staring somewhere over his shoulder at the azalea bushes. I'm not sure, Marcus. My memory, you know, it comes and goes. Some days are, well, they're foggier than others." I let my voice trail off into a whisper, a perfect imitation of a woman losing her grip. Of course," he said, reaching across the small table to pat my hand. His skin was smooth and cool. It felt like a snake. "That's perfectly understandable. It's exactly why you have me, to handle the complicated bits." He pulled back and picked up his own sleek silver tablet, an iPad, of course. He probably paid for it with my damn money. He tapped the screen to life. The glare of it in the afternoon shade was harsh. All I could hear for a moment was the incessant tinkling chime of my new neighbor's wind chimes. Ding-a-ling-a-ling. So cheerful, so maddening. It was a constant, irritating reminder of the world moving on, a world of silly, frivolous things I couldn't afford anymore. "See?" he said, turning the screen toward me. It was covered in charts and graphs and a signature line with a sloppy digitized scrawl that was supposed to be my name. "This is the transfer authorization for the Parker Legacy Preservation Fund, a very smart, very secure investment vehicle. You signed it right here." I leaned forward, squinting. I made a show of fumbling for the reading glasses hanging from a chain around my neck. I don't remember signing anything on a computer screen, sweetie. I still balance my checkbook by hand every month. My late husband, Robert, he always said—" He cut me off, chuckling. It wasn't a kind sound. It was the sound of a predator who knows the trap has sprung. "Honey, that's the beauty of it. You were having one of your foggy days when we met. You were a little overwhelmed." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if he were letting me in on a wonderful secret. I had to guide your hand, digitally speaking. My blood went cold. There it was, the breath caught in my throat, but not from shock. It was from the sheer, unmitigated gall of this little monster. Guide my hand. He sat there, on my porch, drinking my tea, and calmly told me he had forged my signature because I was too old and stupid enough to know what was good for me. Every cell in my body screamed. Years of accounting, of balancing ledgers to the penny, of managing a household budget on a single income after Robert passed, all of it was erased by this smirking 20-something con artist who saw me as a piggy bank with arthritis. I just stared at him, letting my mouth hang open slightly. I let a tear well up in my right eye. I let it tremble on the edge of my eyelid, a perfect glistening diamond of manufactured grief. He saw it, and his smug expression softened into one of heroic sympathy. He thought he was my savior. He said it softly, placing his reptilian hand on mine again. I wanted to snatch my hand back and tell him the only thing I trusted was that he'd look terrible in prison orange. I wanted to tell him that my mind was a steel trap and he'd just willingly walked right into it, whistling a tune. Instead, I just nodded slowly, my gaze dropping to the teacup in my trembling hand. I raised my other hand again, as if to steady myself, and my fingers brushed against the cool, intricate silver of my flower brooch. The tiny lens was aimed right at his lying, handsome face. He just confessed to wire fraud on my front porch. Is this confession the smoking gun she needs?
Lord, you'd think so, wouldn't you? You'd think a full-throated confession caught on video would be the end of the story. You get the bad guy, you get your money back, and you go back to worrying about whether the squirrels are going to eat all your birdseed. But life, honey, is never that simple. The law, I'm learning, is a particularly complicated kind of nonsense. The next day, I didn't call the police. Not yet. I called legal aid. I'm on a fixed income, especially now, and the thought of paying some downtown lawyer with a corner office and a fancy Keurig machine was out of the question. The legal aid office was in a sad little strip mall, wedged between a discount shoe store and a laundromat. The air inside smelled of stale coffee, old paper, and the faint, unmistakable scent of desperation. It was a smell I was getting entirely too familiar with. I sat across a scuffed metal desk from a young man who couldn't have been more than 30, Benjamin Carter. He had kind, tired eyes and a shirt that looked like it had been balled up in the back seat of his Honda Civic. He listened patiently, taking notes on a yellow legal pad while I laid out the whole sordid affair. I told him about Marcus, the firm, the initial investment, the smooth talk, and the missing $87,000. I kept the part about the brooch to myself for the moment. I wanted to see what I was working with. When I finished, he put his pen down and sighed. It was a deep, weary sigh that belonged to a man twice his age. "Mrs. Parker," he began, and I hated his tone already. It was the same one doctors use before they give you bad news about your cholesterol. "I'm going to be honest with you. These cases are difficult." "Difficult," I repeated, my voice flat. "A man stole my life savings. That doesn't seem difficult, Mr. Carter. It seems criminal." He ran a hand through his messy hair. "It is, but proving intent is the hard part. He'll say it was a misunderstanding. His lawyers, and believe me, a firm like that has an army of them,
we'll paint a picture of a devoted young financial advisor trying to help a client who was perhaps a bit confused. He wouldn't say the word old, but it hung in the air between us, thick and ugly. He'll say he moved the money to protect it for you, that he acted in your best interest. It becomes a he said, she said. And frankly, they have more resources to make their he said sound more convincing. I just sat there, my hands clasped in my lap, feeling a familiar cold fury begin to build in my chest. It was the same feeling I'd had on the porch. The world sees a woman with gray hair and a few wrinkles, and their brain just shuts off. They don't see the years of balancing Robert's plumbing books down to the last washer. They don't see the woman who navigated the labyrinth of Social Security and Medicare after he passed. They just see a sweet, confused old thing who needs a nice young man to help her. It's infuriating. I was thinking about how my old Honeywell thermostat has been on the fritz again, clicking on and off all night, and how I couldn't even have a man come look at it now. That's the kind of security Marcus had brought me. So what you're telling me is, I said, my voice dangerously calm, that because I've lived 72 years on this earth, my word is worth less than his? I'm telling you it's an uphill battle, he corrected gently. Without a witness or some kind of written proof where he admits wrongdoing, it's a tough road. I let the silence stretch out. I watched a fly buzz lazily against the grimy window pane. I let him think he'd delivered the final sad verdict. I let him feel sorry for me. Then I reached into my handbag, the big leather one Robert bought me for our 40th anniversary, and I pulled out a small black object. It was a simple digital audio recorder, no bigger than a pack of chewing gum. I placed it on the desk between us. I didn't slam it down, I just slid it across the cheap laminate. It made a soft hissing sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. Ben Carter stared at it. "What's this?" "That, sweetie," I said, meeting his tired eyes with my own, "is what you might call written proof, just without the paper. It's my witness. I had it in my pocket on the porch yesterday. Georgia, you see, is a one-party consent state for audio recordings." His brow furrowed. He was confused. A video recording without consent would be a problem, but a simple audio recording made by a party to the conversation, that was different. That was a game changer. I said, leaning forward slightly, he confessed to forgery, to wire fraud, and he was so proud of himself for helping the confused old lady. I think you'll find he was very, very proud of his help. The exhaustion in Ben Carter's eyes vanished. It was replaced by a spark, a flicker of something I hadn't seen since I walked in the door. Genuine, predatory interest. He picked up the little black recorder as if it were a holy relic. For the first time, he looked at me not as a victim, but as a peer. The look on that young man's face gave me a flicker of hope. But a flicker isn't a bonfire. The question was, would this little black box be enough to burn Marcus's entire world to the ground?
Lord, the coffee they serve in those places could strip paint. We were in what they called a mediation room, which is just a fancy term for a soulless, windowless box designed to make you want to settle just so you can get the hell out and breathe real air again. The table was cheap wood veneer, already peeling at the corners, and the whole room smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. Across from me and Ben Carter sat Marcus Thorne and his lawyer. And honey, this lawyer was a piece of work. He looked like he was poured into his $1,000 suit with a tan that screamed golf club and a smile that never, ever reached his cold reptilian eyes. A real snake oil salesman in a better suit. Marcus, by comparison, just looked puffy and petulant, like a little boy who'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar and was about to blame his sister. Ben had laid out our case, calmly and methodically. He presented the bank statements, the transfer records, the timeline. Clear as day. A to B to C. My money to a new account to God knows where. When he finished, the shark in the suit, a Mr. Davies, just steepled his fingers and gave us that pitying little smile. You know the one that says, "Oh, you poor, confused little thing." "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice smooth as buttered poison, "while we appreciate you laying out your
interpretation of events, what we have here is not a case of fraud. He paused for dramatic effect, glancing at me as if I were a piece of furniture. It's a tragic, but not uncommon, case of a woman in her golden years experiencing cognitive decline. These are accusations born of dementia-fueled paranoia. That was it. That was the line. Dementia. Paranoia. Every drop of blood in my body went from lukewarm to boiling in a nanosecond. I've balanced books to the penny for 45 years. I can still calculate compound interest in my head faster than these young bucks can find the calculator app on their iPhones. My mind is the one thing I have always trusted completely. And this weasel was trying to use my age to paint me as a crazy old bat? I felt Ben's hand rest gently on my arm under the table, a silent signal to stay calm. I took a deep, shaky breath, the scent of that awful coffee filling my lungs, and I held that man's gaze. I didn't flinch. Ben cleared his throat. Mr. Davies, that's a very serious and unsubstantiated claim. We have evidence to the contrary. Mr. Davies chuckled, a low, condescending sound. Evidence? You have the confused recollections of an elderly woman. My client, Mr. Thorne, was acting in her best interest, consolidating funds into a higher yield account to protect her from market volatility. It's all perfectly documented. He slid a folder across the table, and as I looked at it, I remembered one of the last forms Marcus had me sign, something he called a discretionary management agreement. He'd rushed me through it, saying it was just a standard form to let him make trades faster for me during tax season. Said everyone signed it. Standard, my foot. Actually, Ben said, ignoring the folder and pulling out the little black recorder, he placed it in the center of the table right next to Mr. Davies' pristine leather briefcase. Davies stared at it. What is that? Are you illegally recording the session? No, sir, Ben said, his voice still perfectly level. This is from a conversation that took place 2 days ago, a conversation my client was a party to. And as Georgia is a one-party consent state, it's perfectly admissible. He tapped the play button. And there it was, Marcus's voice, filling that stale, quiet room. It wasn't the professional, concerned voice he was using now. Oh no, this was the voice from my porch. Smug, patronizing, proud. Look, Helen, I know it seems complicated. The paperwork is just a formality. I had to sign for you on a few things to get it done quickly. You understand? I'm just moving things around to protect you. You don't need to worry your pretty little head about the details. Ben let it play for a few more seconds. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Mr. Davies' face. That expensive country club tan drained away until he was the color of uncooked dough. His jaw was tight. He looked at Marcus, and if looks could kill, my former financial advisor would have been a pile of ashes on the cheap industrial carpet. Marcus himself looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His mouth hung open slightly, his eyes wide with disbelief and pure, unadulterated panic. Ben Carter leaned forward. Mr. Davies, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, though it cut through the room like a razor. Do you recognize your client's voice admitting to forgery in order to, and I quote, help his client because she shouldn't worry her pretty little head about it? I allowed myself the smallest of smiles. I didn't look at the lawyer. I didn't look at Ben. I looked right at Marcus Thorne. I held his terrified gaze, and I let my smile widen just a fraction. It was the first time in months I felt the ground solid beneath my feet. The look on his face, that was better than any interest payment. That was it. The checkmate. Game over. I'd won? Right?
Bullshit. That's what that feeling was. Pure, unadulterated bullshit. That beautiful, perfect moment of victory, of seeing that snake oil salesman finally squirm, lasted for all of 10 seconds. 10 glorious, sun-drenched seconds where I felt the world right itself on its axis. And then he laughed. It wasn't a big, booming laugh. It was a chuckle. A small, dry, rattling sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the room.
It was the sound of a lid snapping shut on a box. My box. The sound echoed in the crushing silence. And I swear to you, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead got louder, buzzing like angry hornets. My smile faltered. My heart, which had been soaring, did a nosedive straight into the pit of my stomach, taking a gallon of ice water with it. Marcus Thorne, the man who had looked like a ghost just moments before, slowly straightened up in his chair. The panic drained from his face, replaced by something 1,000 times worse, a smug, condescending calm. He ran a hand through his overly gelled hair, smoothed the lapels of his shiny, too-tight suit, and then he looked directly at me. The terror in his eyes was gone. In its place was a cold, glittering amusement. And then he winked. A slow, deliberate wink, like we were sharing a private joke. "That's a very good try, sweetie," he said, his voice smooth as butter again. "Really, A for effort." Sweetie. The word hit me like a physical slap. All the air rushed out of my lungs. It wasn't just patronizing anymore. It was a declaration of war. He was telling me, in front of our lawyers, that my trump card, my smoking gun, was nothing more than a spitball. My lawyer, Ben, didn't flinch. God bless that young man. His face was granite. "A good try?" Ben repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Mr. Thorne, we have you on a recording admitting to felony forgery." Marcus leaned back in his creaky chair, steepling his fingers. He looked like a king holding court in a kingdom of cheap particle board furniture. He completely ignored Ben and kept his eyes locked on me. "Helen, Helen, Helen," he sighed, shaking his head with mock disappointment. "You're a numbers lady, an accountant. You should know better than anyone that details matter. Context matters." He turned his gaze to his own lawyer, Mr. Davies, who still looked like he'd swallowed a bad oyster. "Sir," Marcus said, his tone suddenly all business, respectful, and efficient. "If you'll recall, back in March, we migrated all our legacy clients to the new Fiduciary Prime platform. Remember the big push? New compliance standards." Davies nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing, trying to follow the logic. Everyone had to sign the new Consolidated Account Agreement packet. It was a beast, about 40 pages. Helen signed hers on March 14th. We have the original, of course. Page 32, subsection C, paragraph 4, the Expedited Transaction Authorization Clause. He paused for dramatic effect. The room was so quiet, I could hear the faint traffic on the street 4 floors below. It grants limited discretionary authority to the acting advisor to execute signatures on inter-account transfer forms and liquidation orders under specific market conditions to prevent asset erosion. It's standard boilerplate for the new platform to protect the client's capital. I was just doing my job as authorized. He turned back to me, his smile a venomous slash. "The recording you have? That was me explaining the process in layman's terms to an elderly client who gets flustered by jargon. I was reassuring you, telling you not to worry your pretty little head was just my clumsy way of saying I was handling the complex part, just like you authorized me to do when you signed the paperwork." The blood drained from my face. The Consolidated Account Agreement? I remembered it. A thick stack of papers he'd put in front of me during one of our meetings. He'd flipped through it, pointing. "Just initial here, Helen. Sign here for the new system, standard update, just a formality." It was so boring, so full of mind-numbing legal language. My eyes had glazed over. I trusted him. I signed where he told me to sign. I didn't read the 40 pages of fine print. Who does? My mind was reeling. A frantic Rolodex of signatures and forms. Had I done that? Had I signed my own financial death warrant on page 32 of some forsaken packet he'd slid under my nose between sips of lukewarm coffee?
The solid ground I'd felt just minutes ago had crumbled into dust, and I was in a free fall. That confident smirk on his face wasn't the look of a man who was caught. It was the look of a man who had built the trap himself, watched me walk into it, and now was savoring the sound of the steel jaws snapping shut. The checkmate I'd imagined wasn't mine. It was his. He had been 3 moves ahead the entire damn time. He had used my trust, my age, and the sheer tediousness of corporate paperwork against me. He knew I wouldn't read it. He counted on it. I looked at his face, so full of triumph. He wasn't just a thief. He was proud of it. He thought he was brilliant. And the most terrifying part, the question that started as a whisper and grew to a scream in my mind, was this: why isn't he scared?
Lord, the arrogance. It radiated off him in waves, thick and suffocating like cheap cologne in a hot elevator. That smug little smirk never left his face. My ace in the hole, my secret recording, had landed with all the impact of a feather on a puddle of mud. I saw it, the flicker of panic in his lawyer's eyes, a brief, beautiful moment of terror. But it was just that, a moment. The lawyer, a slick young buck in a suit that probably cost more than my first car, cleared his throat. He smoothed his silk tie, squared his shoulders, and the panic was gone, replaced by a professional condescension that made my skin crawl. "Well, Helen," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "while that was dramatic, I'm afraid my client had anticipated a certain level of theatricality." He let the word hang in the air, a little poisoned dart aimed right at my credibility. He leaned forward, placing his manicured hands on the polished mahogany of the conference table. "As I'm sure your own counsel has advised you," he said, glancing at my overwhelmed public aid lawyer, "Georgia is a 2-party consent state. That little recording you just played? Honey, it's not just inadmissible, it's illegal. You broke the law, recording Mr. Thorne without his permission." The air went out of my lungs. 2-party consent. Of course I knew that. In the heat of my righteous anger, in my desperate need for proof, I'd completely forgotten. My smoking gun had just backfired and shot me right between the eyes. My one piece of undeniable evidence was now a crime I had committed. The trap wasn't just the contract, the trap was the law itself, and I had marched right into it. I watched as Marcus, my dear, trustworthy Marcus, took his cue. He didn't even let his lawyer finish. This was his show, and he was the star. He reached into his own leather briefcase, a fancy one, probably bought with my Social Security checks, and pulled out a crisp manila folder. He didn't slide it. He placed it on the table with a quiet finality that felt like a coffin lid closing. "This, I believe, is more relevant to the situation," Marcus said, his voice smooth as butter. He pushed the folder toward my side of the table. My hands were shaking. I could feel the familiar throb of arthritis in my knuckles as I reached for it. Inside was a single, heavy stock piece of paper with an official-looking letterhead. Atlanta Center for Geriatric Cognitive Health. I'd never heard of it. I'd never been there. I read the first line, "Preliminary Cognitive Assessment for Mrs. Helen Parker." The words blurred. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, a frantic drumbeat of doom. I forced my eyes to focus, to read the clinical, detached language that was systematically dismantling my life. Patient exhibits signs of moderate memory impairment, difficulty recalling recent financial discussions, displays notable paranoia, particularly regarding trusted financial professionals, prone to confabulation under stress. Confabulation? I'm a former accountant, sweetie. I know my vocabulary.
It's a fancy $5 word for lying without knowing you're lying, for filling in the blanks in your memory with things that never happened. He hadn't just stolen my money, he was stealing my mind. And then I saw it, buried in a paragraph of medical jargon designed to make my head spin. The doctor, a Dr. Alistair Finch I'd never met in my life, noted my fixation on esoteric contract details. He wrote that I had shown agitation and confusion regarding standard investment vehicles, particularly my repeated and seemingly obsessive inquiries about the phantom factor provision in my portfolio agreement, a standard diversification clause she seemed unable to comprehend. The phantom factor, that damn clause, the one that made no sense, the one I'd asked him about a dozen times, the one he'd always brushed off with a wave of his hand and a patronizing, "Don't you worry your pretty little head about that, Helen." My diligence, my accountant's eye for detail, the very skill I had honed over 40 years of balancing books to the penny, he had twisted it. He'd found a doctor, paid him God knows what, and turned my greatest strength into a symptom of senility. I looked up from the paper, my vision swimming. Marcus was watching me, that same placid, triumphant smirk on his face. He wasn't a thief who was afraid to get caught. He was a predator who had successfully convinced the world that his prey was already dead. He had an answer for everything. My signature on a 40-page document I hadn't read, my illegal recording, and now a doctor's report stating that the woman accusing him was a confused, paranoid old lady who made things up. He was using every stereotype about aging as a weapon. He was counting on the world to see a frail, elderly woman to pat her on the head and to believe the calm, well-dressed man with a medical report in his hand. It was a masterpiece of cruelty. He wasn't just going to get away with it, he was going to make me the villain of my own story. He was going to have me declared incompetent, a doddering old fool who couldn't be trusted with her own checkbook, let alone a legal complaint. The despair was a physical thing, a cold, heavy weight pressing down on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. The fight wasn't about money anymore, it was about my sanity. How can you fight a ghost? How do you prove you're not crazy when the man who robbed you has a piece of paper from a doctor saying you are? How can you ever win when he's not just using the law against you, he's using your own mind?
Lord, the silence in that room, it was thick enough to choke on. We were in one of those sterile mediation conference rooms downtown. You know the kind. Beige walls, a table so polished you could see your own misery reflected in it, and a pot of lukewarm coffee in the corner that smelled like disappointment. The only sound was the faint tick, tick, tick of a cheap plastic clock on the wall, each second counting down the last moments of my dignity. Across the table, Marcus sat there, cool as a cucumber, looking like he'd just come from a damn photo shoot for Successful Scoundrels Monthly. Not a hair out place. He sipped his water, his expression perfectly neutral, but his eyes, oh, his eyes were dancing. He was enjoying the show. To my right, my own lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man I was paying $250 an hour, was slouched in his chair like a sack of potatoes. He kept clearing his throat, shuffling his legal pad, refusing to look at me. He'd read the doctor's report, he'd heard my illegal recording was inadmissible, he'd seen the game board, and in his mind, the king had already been toppled. My king. He'd given up. I was paying a man a fortune to watch me drown. And then there was the mediator, a woman probably in her late 50s, with sensible shoes and a string of pearls. She wasn't looking at me like a client or even a victim. She was looking at me with pity. It was the most infuriating thing I'd ever seen. That soft, gentle, condescending gaze that says, "Oh, you poor, confused old dear. Let's get this over with so you can go home and have your nap." She probably had a mother my age. She thought she understood. Sweetie, she didn't know the first thing. Mrs. Parker, Henderson finally mumbled, his voice low as if he were delivering a eulogy, given the new evidence, Mr. Vance's team has presented an offer. I just stared at him. An offer, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a spot on the polished table. They are willing to return $5,000 in exchange for you dropping all claims and signing a non-disclosure agreement. $5,000 out of $87,000. He was offering to give me back less than 6% of my own money, and in return, I would have to sign a piece of paper legally gagging me, forcing me to agree that I was the liar. It wasn't an offer. It was a final slap in the face. It was the salt, the lemon juice, and the rubbing alcohol poured into the wound all at once. The despair I'd felt before was nothing compared to this. This was a public execution. The weight on my chest became a physical thing, a crushing pressure. I could feel my arthritis flaring up in my knuckles as I gripped the arms of my chair. My whole life, I'd been the one who balanced the books, the one who found the discrepancies, the one who caught the errors. Robert used to say I could find a missing penny in the federal budget. My mind, my sharpness, that was me. And Marcus had taken that, twisted it, and sold it back to the world as a bargain bin diagnosis of senility. My mind drifted for a second, away from the humiliation in that room. I thought about my bank statements spread out on my kitchen table for weeks. I had gone over them 1,000 times, the big withdrawals, the wire transfers, but my eyes kept snagging on this one tiny, stupid little thing, a recurring monthly charge for $14.99 from some company called Viridian Data Services. I'd asked Marcus about it 3 times before this all blew up. "Oh, that's an old subscription service, Helen. A leftover. I'll have it canceled immediately," he'd said, waving his hand dismissively. But he never did. Month after month, there it was. Sloppy. It was so insignificant, so utterly pointless in the face of everything else. It was a loose thread on a perfectly tailored suit of lies, a tiny crack in his masterpiece of cruelty. But what good was a crack when the whole damn building was collapsing on top of me? It was just another reminder of his casual disregard, another promise broken. "Helen," the mediator's voice was soft, syrupy, "it's a difficult situation. Sometimes in these matters, finding a path to closure is the most important thing." Closure. She wanted me to take this pittance and call it closure. To let this young buck destroy my financial security, assassinate my character, and walk away with my life savings, and I should be grateful for the opportunity to shut up about it? Screw that! I looked from the mediator's pitying face to my lawyer's defeated slump to Marcus's placid, victorious smirk. They had all decided. The case was closed. The old lady had lost her marbles and her money. Story over. They were just waiting for me to sign the final page. My $87,000, the money Robert and I saved, the buffer that stood between me and a state-run nursing home, was gone. And my sanity was next. My own lawyer thought I was delusional. The system thought I was incompetent. The thief was about to be legally declared the victim of my paranoid fantasies. How do you fight when you are utterly and completely alone, when every weapon you brought to the battle has been turned against you? Was this it? Was this really the end of the line?
Lord, I felt old. Not just the usual 72-year-old aches in my knuckles when the Atlanta humidity kicks in. This was a different kind of old. It was a deep, soul-level weariness, the kind that settles in your bones when you realize the world has moved on and you've been left standing on the platform, holding a ticket for a train that no longer runs. I drove home from that mediation in a daze. I don't remember the traffic on I-285. I don't remember pulling into my own driveway. But I remember the sound of the front door clicking shut behind me, the silence in Robert's house, my house now was so absolute it was like a physical weight. It was the sound of being utterly, completely alone. I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood there in the entryway as the evening sun bled through the windows, painting long, lonely shadows across the hardwood floors. Dust motes danced in the fading light, each one a tiny ghost of a life that felt richer, safer. A life with Robert. A life before some smooth-talking whippersnapper in a suit that cost more than my monthly Social Security check decided to use my nest egg as his personal slush fund. My body moved on autopilot. I went into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and pulled out my favorite china cup, the one with the little blue forget-me-nots. Earl Grey, strong. The familiar scent of bergamot was supposed to be a comfort, but that day, it just smelled like yesterday. I sat down at the dining room table, the one we'd bought for our 25th anniversary, and just stared out at the azaleas. The cup of tea grew cold in my hands. I felt foolish, a stupid, trusting old woman who fell for a pretty smile and a firm handshake. My own lawyer looked at me with pity. Marcus looked at me with contempt. And the mediator? Oh, that woman with her condescending, syrupy voice talking about closure. Honey, the only closure I wanted was the sound of a jail cell door slamming shut on Marcus Thorne. My laptop was sitting on the corner of the table, closed. My son Leo insisted I get it a few years back. He's a tech guy out in California, and he worries. He set the whole thing up with all this ridiculous security software, firewalls, pop-up blockers, two-factor this, encrypted that. I swear, logging on to check my email is like trying to break into Fort Knox. He even set up this absurdly over-the-top notification system for the Wi-Fi. It sends me an email every time a new phone or tablet connects to the network. Just a precaution, Mom, he'd said. Keeps the riffraff out. It was mostly just annoying. Another piece of technology I didn't ask for, sending me alerts I didn't understand. Just as the last sliver of sunlight vanished from the sky, the laptop, which I'd forgotten was sleeping and not off, let out a soft ping. An email. In the crushing silence, it sounded as loud as a gunshot. I didn't have the energy to even look. It was probably just a sale at Talbot's or another political campaign asking for $5. But the silence that followed was worse. I needed a distraction, anything to stop the tape replaying in my head, the smirk on Marcus's face, the slump of my lawyer's shoulders, and the mediator, that woman with her condescending, syrupy voice talking about closure. Honey, the only closure I wanted was the sound of a jail cell door slamming shut on Marcus Thorne. My laptop was sitting on the corner of the table, closed. My son Leo insisted I get it a few years back. He's a tech guy out in California, and he worries. He set the whole thing up with all this ridiculous security software, firewalls, pop-up blockers, two-factor this, encrypted that. I swear, logging on to check my email is like trying to break into Fort Knox. He even set up this absurdly over-the-top notification system for the Wi-Fi. It sends me an email every time a new phone or tablet connects to the network. Just a precaution, Mom, he'd said. Keeps the riffraff out. It was mostly just annoying. Another piece of technology I didn't ask for, sending me alerts I didn't understand. Just as the last sliver of sunlight vanished from the sky, the laptop, which I'd forgotten was sleeping and not off, let out a soft ping. An email. In the crushing silence, it sounded as loud as a gunshot. I didn't have the energy to even look. It was probably just a sale at Talbot's or another political campaign asking for $5. But the silence that followed was worse. I needed a distraction, anything to stop the tape replaying in my head. The smirk on Marcus's face, the slump of my lawyer's shoulders, and the mediator, that woman with her condescending, syrupy voice talking about closure. Honey, the only closure I wanted was the sound of a jail cell door slamming shut on Marcus Dorn. My laptop was sitting on the corner of the table, closed. My son Leo insisted I get it a few years back. He's a tech guy out in California, and he worries. He set the whole thing up with all this ridiculous security software. Firewalls, pop-up blockers, two-factor this, encrypted that. I swear, logging on to check my email is like trying to break into Fort Knox. He even set up this absurdly over-the-top notification system for the Wi-Fi. It sends me an email every time a new phone or tablet connects to the network. Just a precaution, Mom, he'd said. Keeps the riffraff out. It was mostly just annoying. Another piece of technology I didn't ask for, sending me alerts I didn't understand. Just as the last sliver of sunlight vanished from the sky, the laptop, which I'd forgotten was sleeping and not off, let out a soft ping. An email. In the crushing silence, it sounded as loud as a gunshot. I didn't have the energy to even look. It was probably just a sale at Talbot's or another political campaign asking for $5. But the silence that followed was worse. I needed a distraction, anything to stop the tape replaying in my head, the smirk on Marcus's face, the slump of my lawyer's shoulders, and the mediator, that woman with her condescending, syrupy voice talking about closure. Honey, the only closure I wanted was the sound of a jail cell door slamming shut on Marcus Thorne. My cursor was on the trash icon, but my hand froze. I don't know why. Maybe it was just the sheer emptiness of the evening ahead. I clicked it open. More nonsense. A new device has connected to your Parker Guest Wi-Fi network. If you do not recognize this device, please take immediate action. Device type, Apple iPad Pro, MAC address 3D F2C9A6B34F. Connection time, October 15th, 2:32 p.m. I stared at the screen. MAC address, Apple iPad Pro. It meant nothing, just a string of letters and numbers, digital noise from a world I barely understood. I was about to close it, to surrender to the quiet in the dark. But then my eyes caught the date again, October 15th. My breath hitched. My accountant's brain, the part of me that had been dormant and beaten down for months, flickered to life. Dates are my thing. I never forget a date tied to a number. October 15th. That was the last day Marcus came to the house. The day he brought over those final fraudulent papers for me to sign. He'd been so charming, so reassuring. He'd sat right there at this very table, tapping away on his own sleek silver tablet while I made him tea. An Apple iPad Pro. The air in the room suddenly felt different, thinner, sharper. I looked at that string of numbers and letters, 3D F2C9A6B34F. It was meaningless, and yet it was a fact, a digital footprint, a record of a specific device in my house on a specific day at a specific time. A piece of evidence nobody had ever asked for, that I never knew existed. It was just an automated, annoying notification from my son's paranoid security setup, a bit of digital junk mail. But sweetie, could this annoying little notification be something more?
Hell yes, it was something more. It was everything. You know that feeling when you've been driving in a thick fog for miles, just creeping along, and then all at once the sun burns through and the world is sharp and clear again? That's what happened in my head. For months, my brain had been a swamp of grief and shame. But that one little email, that string of digital nonsense, was like a lightning strike. The fog evaporated, and the accountant, the real Helen Parker, the one who could spot a misplaced decimal from 50 paces, woke up. All the pieces that had been rattling around in my head, disconnected and meaningless, suddenly began to snap together. The click-clack of the lock in my mind was almost audible. Marcus, his charming smile, the way he called me Mrs. P like I was his favorite aunt, the way his eyes would just skim over the numbers on the pages he gave me, reassuring me it was all standard procedure. His sleek silver iPad Pro, my Wi-Fi, my house, October 15th. It wasn't just a coincidence. In my world, the world of ledgers and balance sheets, there are no coincidences. There are only facts, figures, and the trails they leave behind. This was a trail. A digital breadcrumb left by a thieving little weasel who thought I was too old and too stupid to ever find it. My hands, which had been trembling with exhaustion just moments before, were suddenly rock steady. I didn't hesitate. I didn't second guess. I picked up my iPhone, the one Leo insists I keep charged, for emergencies, and my thumb hit his name on my favorites list before I'd even fully formed the thought. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Mom, is everything okay?" The usual note of worried patience in his voice. He was probably expecting me to ask how to work the television remote again. Screw that, not tonight. "Leo, honey, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said. My voice didn't crack. It was low and clear. The same voice I used to use when I'd find a major discrepancy in a quarterly report. The voice that meant business. There was a pause on his end. "Okay, you sound different." "That's because I am different," I said, walking over to the kitchen counter and leaning against it. "I need you to get into that Fort Knox security system you installed on my internet, that ParkerNet thing. I need information." "The firewall logs? Mom, what's this about? Did something happen?" "Something's been happening for 6 months, Leo, and I've been too blind to see it. Now, I need you to be my eyes. I have an email here. It says an Apple iPad Pro connected to my network on October 15th at 2:32 p.m. I have the MAC address." I read the string of characters to him slowly and precisely. 3D.F2.C9.A6.B3.F4. I need you to confirm it, and I need to know everything else your system logged about that device. I don't mean just the time, I mean everything. How long was it connected? What was its signal strength? Can you tell what rooms it was in? I want every last bit of digital dirt you can dig up on it. And when you find it, you call me back immediately. Another silence, longer this time. I could practically hear the gears turning in his tech-savvy head. He was finally understanding this wasn't about a lost password. "Mom, this sounds serious." "It is," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, but with an edge like broken glass. "It's $87,000 serious. Now, you do this for me, and I swear to you, Leo, next time you visit, I will make you a pitcher of sweet tea so good, it'll make you weep." He let out a short, surprised laugh. "Okay, Mom, okay. Give me a few minutes. I'm on it." I hung up the phone and placed it gently on the granite countertop. The room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of defeat. This was the quiet of a war room, the calm before the storm. The air tasted of ozone, of possibility. I went to the pantry, pulled out the box of Earl Grey, and boiled the kettle. I was a general preparing for a campaign. My mind was racing, fitting the new potential data into the puzzle. The MAC address was the anchor, the one verifiable fact in a sea of his lies. It was the digital equivalent of a murder weapon. If Leo could confirm it and add more detail, how long was he really here? He said he was only here for a quick signature, maybe 30 minutes. But what if the log said an hour and a half? What was he doing for that extra time? The phone buzzed on the counter, making me jump. It was a text from Leo. My heart hammered against my ribs as I picked it up. Mom, got it. MAC address is 100% match. Device name, Marcus iPad Pro 13. Connected October 15th, 2:32 p.m. Disconnected at 3:44 p.m. Total connection time, 1 hour, 12 minutes. 1 hour and 12 minutes. More than double the time he claimed. The lying snake. I felt a surge of cold, righteous anger, but it was the next line of the text that made the breath catch in my throat. And Mom, this is weird. For the first 20 minutes, the signal connection was strongest from the living room, but for the last 40 minutes of the session, the signal was at maximum strength from the location of your office. My little home office. The room where I kept my old checkbook registers, my file cabinet with all my past bank statements, my spare key to my safe deposit box, the room he had absolutely no reason to be in. The final ugly piece of the puzzle wasn't just about the money he transferred online, it was about what else he was looking for. What other damage had he done while I was in the other room, humming to myself and waiting for the kettle to boil for his damn tea? What is the final piece of the puzzle he was trying to steal?
Lord, give me strength. Some things you can never unknow. Standing there in my kitchen, staring at my son's text message on my little iPhone, the truth finally landed. It wasn't just a click of a button on a website. It was a violation. He was in my house, in my private spaces, rooting around while I was just feet away, waiting for his damn Earl Grey to steep. The final piece of the puzzle wasn't about the digital transfer. It was about the old-fashioned, physical things he must have been looking for in my office. My checkbook, my spare safe deposit box key, my entire life, documented on paper in a filing cabinet he had no business even looking at. That cold, hard fury is what I carried with me back into that courtroom. Let me paint you a picture. The air in there is always the same, stale with a hint of old paper and cheap floor polish. Marcus was sitting at the defendant's table, looking like butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. He'd actually winked at me when I walked in earlier. Winked, as if we were sharing some charming little secret. His lawyer, a slick fella in a suit that probably cost more than my first car, was shuffling papers, looking bored. They thought this was a done deal. They thought it was my word, the word of a forgetful old widow, against their airtight, corporate-backed story. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating a retired accountant with a grudge. My lawyer, bless his heart, called his next witness. The prosecution calls Leo Parker. My boy. He walked up to the stand, and I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. He was wearing the blazer we bought him for his cousin's wedding 5 years ago. It was a little tight in the shoulders now, but he stood up straight and tall. He looked so serious, placing his hand on the Bible. Marcus just watched him with a look of mild amusement, like this was some cute little sideshow. Oh, honey, you have no idea what's coming for you. My lawyer started simple. Mr. Parker, can you tell the court your profession? I'm a senior network engineer, Leo said, his voice clear and steady. And can you explain what that means in layman's terms? I design, build, and maintain computer networks, the systems that let our devices talk to each other and the internet. The other lawyer didn't even bother to object. This was all just boring tech talk to him. Then my lawyer asked Leo about my home Wi-Fi router. Leo explained that every modern router keeps a log, an automatic, uneditable, time-stamped record of every single device that connects to it. He said, it's immutable. You can't change it without leaving a glaring digital footprint. He then presented the logs from my router, blown up on a big screen for the jury to see. And there it was, plain as day. Can you read the entry for October 15th at 2:32 p.m., my lawyer asked. Leo cleared his throat. Entry log shows a successful connection at 14:32 hours. Device name, Marcus_iPad Pro_13. The device has a unique hardware identifier, a MAC address of 00,1B,63,84,45,E6. He explained to the jury that a MAC address is like a fingerprint for a digital device. No two are the same in the entire world. A little flicker of something crossed Marcus's face. Annoyance? His smug smile tightened just a fraction. He leaned over and whispered something to his lawyer, who just waved a dismissive hand. Then, my lawyer called the next witness, a woman from the bank's fraud department, a forensic accountant. You know, a kindred spirit. She was all business, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She didn't even glance at Marcus. She presented the bank's server logs for the same day. At 2:35 p.m., she stated, her voice crisp, our servers recorded a successful login to Mrs. Parker's online account, followed by an e-signature authorization for a wire transfer of $87,000. Marcus's lawyer perked up. An e-signature authorization, so Mrs. Parker did sign it. The accountant gave him a look that could freeze water. The signature was provided digitally, yes. Our systems, for security, record the specific hardware ID of the device that makes such a transaction. My lawyer stepped forward. And can you tell the court the MAC address of the device that authorized that transaction? She looked down at her file, then up at the jury. The MAC address recorded for the transaction at 2:38 p.m. was 00,63,84,45,E6. You could hear a pin drop. It was the exact same number, the exact same fingerprint. It was a direct, unbreakable digital chain from his company iPad connected to my Wi-Fi in my house to the theft of my life's savings. The accountant went on to specify where the money went, a newly opened account at the St. Elias Bank and Trust in the Cayman Islands. She mentioned it was set up as a discretionary family trust, which sounded so official and boring, the jury's eyes kind of glazed over. But I filed that little detail away. I wasn't looking at her, though. I was looking at Marcus. The color had completely drained from his face. That handsome, polished, snake oil salesman's mask just melted. It slid right off, and underneath was pure, naked terror. His jaw was working, but no sound came out. His eyes, wide and panicked, darted from the screen with the matching numbers to the jury, to his own lawyer, who now looked like he'd been slapped with a wet fish. That young buck finally understood he hadn't been defending a charming getaway. He'd been defending a common thief who got his hand, his iPad, and his whole damn self in the cookie jar. The judge banged his gavel to get everyone's attention. The digital chain was complete, unbreakable. Checkmate. You could feel the air leave the room. But let me tell you, when you corner a rat, that's not the end of the story. That's just when it gets desperate. The real question wasn't if he did it anymore. It was what a man with nothing left to lose would do next.
Well, the answer to what a man with nothing left to lose would do next? Not a damn thing is the answer. Not one. You expect a big movie scene, a desperate lunge, maybe some shouting about how he was framed. Honey, real life is so much more pathetic. Marcus Thorne didn't explode. He just deflated, like a cheap pool float with a slow leak. His lawyer, that slick little whippersnapper, must have pulled him into a back room and read him the riot act. With that digital fingerprint evidence, there was no wiggle room. None. So our little go-getter took a plea bargain. Federal wire fraud. They dropped a few of the lesser charges to get him to sign on the dotted line, but the big one stuck. He's going away for a good long while. Long enough for his tailored suits to go out of style and for him to forget what a steak tastes like. The justice system moves like molasses in January, but sometimes, every now and then, it grinds in the right direction. So that's that. I'm sitting here now, on my own porch. The evening's just starting to cool off, and you can smell the jasmine I planted by the trellis. My arthritis is acting up a bit in my right hand, but I can hold my teacup just fine. It's Earl Grey, of course. Some things you don't compromise on. And the money? Oh, the bank made a big show of it. A very serious man in a suit called me personally.
Mrs. Parker, we've completed our internal investigation, and the funds have been restored to your account. Just like that. $87,000 plopped right back where it belonged. Seeing that number in my Wells Fargo app, it wasn't about being rich. Lord knows I'm not. It was the feeling of the floor coming back up to meet my feet. It was my husband's hard work, my careful planning, my next 10 or 15 years of not having to worry about every single Social Security check. It was my dignity. My grandson, Leo, is here with me. He's sitting on the steps, hunched over his iPhone like they all are, but tonight he's talking to me. He's trying to explain this cryptocurrency thing to me again. Bitcoin, Ethereum, sound like a bunch of Greek gods to me. But you know what? For the first time, I'm actually listening. A few months ago, I would have waved him off. That's just funny money on a computer, sweetie. But after seeing how a simple string of numbers, a digital fingerprint, could either ruin you or save you, well, I'm starting to think maybe this old dog needs to learn a few new tricks. So the blockchain is like a public checkbook, Grandma, he's saying, his face all lit up by the screen. Everyone can see the transaction, so nobody can cheat. I take a sip of my tea. A checkbook that can't be cooked. I can appreciate that. He grins. We're quiet for a minute, just listening to the cicadas tuning up for their nightly concert. It's peaceful. It feels over. And then my phone buzzes on the wicker table next to me, a soft little bzz that cuts right through the calm. It's an email notification. I pick it up, squinting a little at the screen. The sender is a name I don't recognize, a woman from Savannah. But it's the subject line that makes the porcelain of my teacup suddenly cold against my fingers. It says, I read about your case. Marcus Thorne got my mother too. I set the cup down in its saucer with a quiet little clink. My hand is perfectly steady. I tap the screen and the email opens. It's short. A woman, about my son's age, read an article about the trial online. She said her mother, 81 and in the early stages of dementia, lost her entire nest egg, over $100,000 2 years ago. Her financial advisor? A charming man named Marcus Thorne. The police report went nowhere. The bank called it an authorized transfer. And the money? It had been moved into something called a discretionary family trust at a bank in the Cayman Islands. St. Elias Bank and Trust. The same damn one. That boring little detail the accountant mentioned, the one that made the jury's eyes glaze over. It wasn't a one-off trick he used on me, it was his whole business model. Leo looks up. Everything okay, Grandma? I don't look at him. I'm looking out at the twilight settling over my azaleas. I'm thinking about this woman's mother in Savannah, and I'm wondering how many other mothers, how many other grandmothers got the Marcus Thorne treatment? How many of them were too sick or too scared or too ashamed to fight back? He didn't just steal my money. He had a system, a pipeline built on trust and Earl Grey tea that went straight from the living rooms of women like me to some anonymous account in the middle of the ocean. I take a slow, deliberate sip of my now lukewarm tea. The taste is bitter, but my mind is crystal clear. Getting my money back, seeing him in handcuffs, that was my victory. That was winning my war. But this email? This is a declaration. The war is won, but a larger battle has just begun.